Welcome to Dark Untold. Tonight we'll journey deep into the shadows of Japan's darkest legends. From haunted wells and cursed poems to vengeful spirits that linger in silence, these are the stories that have chilled generations. Stay with us as we unveil the 10 most disturbing Japanese horror stories, tales that may keep you awake long after the video ends. On a cold, quiet night in a small Japanese town, a group of middle school students whispered about a terrifying rumor that had been circulating for weeks. They huddled close together, voices hushed, as if speaking too loudly might summon her. "Have you heard about the woman with the mask?" one of them asked, his tone trembling. "The one who asks if she's beautiful," another replied. Everyone knew the story. She appeared suddenly on dark streets, in lonely alleys, sometimes even outside school gates. A tall woman in a beige coat, her face hidden behind a simple, white, surgical mask. In today's world, masks were nothing unusual, but what made her horrifying was not the mask, it was what lay beneath it. If you were unlucky enough to encounter her, she would stop you in your tracks with a question that seemed almost innocent. Tilting her head slightly, her eyes wide and unblinking, she would whisper in a soft, chilling voice, "Watashi kirei?" "Am I beautiful?" If you answered no, she would draw a pair of gleaming scissors from her coat pocket and slice you down where you stood. But if you answered yes, she would slowly tug the mask down, revealing the grotesque truth. Her mouth slit open from ear to ear, jagged teeth shining, gums wet with blood. She would smile, a terrible gaping smile, and ask again, "How about now?" If you answered no the second time, she would kill you instantly. If you answered yes, she would carve the same ghastly smile into your own face, ensuring you looked just like her. No matter what you said, escape seemed impossible. The legend of Kuchisake Onna, the slit-mouthed woman, has haunted Japan for decades. Parents warned their children not to wander alone at night. Teachers sometimes walked students home in groups during outbreaks of sightings. For many, she was not just a folktale but a living nightmare that stalked the streets. What made the story especially chilling was its uncertainty. Was she once a real woman, mutilated by her jealous husband? A mistress punished for betrayal? A victim of a medical mishap or an accident? Or simply a cautionary tale to frighten children into obedience? No one could say for sure. But those who claimed to have seen her never forgot her eyes, cold, pitiless, and hungry. In the winter of 1979, fear became real. Across several prefectures, police received dozens of calls. Witnesses described a strange woman matching the legend exactly. Long black hair, surgical mask, scissors glinting in her hand. Schools in Nagasaki sent children home in groups. Communities organized patrols. Newspapers fanned the panic with reports of sightings. The slit-mouthed woman had escaped the shadows of folklore and stepped into the streets of modern Japan. Some called it mass hysteria, but to the children who walked home under the flickering street lamps, the fear was real enough to quicken their steps. And for one boy named Daichi, the legend would soon cross from story to reality. Daichi had heard the whispers 100 times. He was 13, old enough to scoff at ghost stories, but still young enough to feel a chill in his bones when walking home alone after dark. His classmates spoke of Kuchisake Onna with trembling voices. Some swore she had followed them. A boy a grade above claimed he had turned a corner and found her standing at the far end of the street, watching. When he looked again, she was gone. Rumors spread like wildfire. A girl who answered no was never seen again. A boy who said yes was found the next day with his mouth torn into a grotesque smile. No one could prove the stories, but that only made them worse. Daiichi didn't want to believe. But one late autumn evening, his disbelief would be tested. It was barely 6, yet the sky was already dark. The air was sharp with cold, and the streets of his neighborhood lay quiet, most shops shuttered. Daiichi clutched his school bag, footsteps echoing uncomfortably loud. He quickened his pace, eyes darting between shadows. Then he heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps behind him. At first, he thought it was just another passerby, but when he looked back, the street was empty. His pulse quickened. He walked faster. The footsteps followed, steady and unhurried. He turned a corner, dared a glance, and froze. Under a flickering street lamp stood a tall woman. Her long hair swayed gently in the breeze. Her face was hidden by a white surgical mask. A beige coat draped from her shoulders, and in one hand she held something that gleamed faintly, scissors impossibly long and sharp. She tilted her head, studying him like prey. The lamp buzzed and flickered, plunging her face in and out of shadow. Daiichi forced himself to look away, to walk faster, but the footsteps followed. Clack, 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 growing closer. Then suddenly, impossibly, she was ahead of him, blocking his path. Watashi? Yūrei? Her voice was soft, almost kind, but it sliced through him like a knife. Daiichi's mouth went dry. Every story rushed back at once. If he said no, she would kill him. If he said yes, she would reveal her face. He didn't want either. His mind scrambled for one of the escape tricks whispered among his classmates, offering candy, saying something confusing, pretending to have an appointment. But under her gaze, his thoughts dissolved into panic. Yes, he stammered. Her eyes glimmered with dark satisfaction. Slowly, she raised her pale hand to her mask. The fabric stretched, then slid down. Daiichi's breath caught. Beneath the mask, her mouth gaped open, torn from ear to ear. Jagged teeth glistened wet with blood. The wound looked fresh, skin ragged as though carved again and again to keep it open. And she smiled, a grotesque, endless smile. Watashi? Yūrei? She whispered again. Daiichi screamed. The next day, Daiichi's absence spread unease through the school. Some said he had simply run away. Others whispered that Kuchisake Onna had claimed him. His friends refused to walk home alone. Parents panicked. Teachers tried to calm the students, but the stories only grew darker. More sightings were reported across town. A woman in a mask spotted outside a convenience store. A tall figure glimpsed in the alley behind the school. A child claimed she had been followed all the way to her front gate, only for the woman to vanish into thin air. The police dismissed most of it as hysteria, but they could not ignore the fear. Patrols were doubled. Warnings were issued. Yet the panic spread like wildfire, crossing prefectures, gripping entire regions. And then came the chilling details. Witnesses described the same thing, her voice soft but cold, her mask, her scissors. A boy said she chased him down a narrow street, footsteps clicking faster and faster until he collapsed in tears. When police searched, they found nothing. Psychologists explained it away as a case of mass delusion, the legend so deeply believed that it became real in people's minds. But skeptics struggled to explain the uncanny similarities in so many accounts. Escape rituals multiplied, candy, coins, phrases like "you're average" or "I'm busy" supposedly distracted her. These tricks gave children a sliver of hope, but also made the legend stronger. After all, why invent ways to escape something that didn't exist? Decades passed, but Kuchisake Onna never truly faded. She lingered in the whispers of schoolyards, in the cautious steps of children walking home at dusk. She reappeared in films, television, urban legends, and late-night dares among teenagers. And sometimes, in the dead of night, people still reported seeing her. A tall woman in a beige coat, standing beneath a flickering streetlight, her mask hiding something unspeakable. If you are ever alone on a dark street in Japan, and a woman steps from the shadows to block your path, tilts her head and whispers, "Watashi kirei?" Think carefully before you answer, because whether you say yes or no, the slit-mouthed woman may already have chosen your fate. On a chilly autumn night in Sapporo, the streets lay almost empty, blanketed by a low, crawling fog that clung to the asphalt like a living thing. The only sound was the faint buzz of street lamps struggling to pierce the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a train wailed, its horn echoing across the city like a cry from another world. For the middle schoolers who gathered near the edge of town, this was the perfect setting to whisper about the urban legend that had kept them awake for years. The story of Teke Teke. "Don't walk home near the tracks after sunset," one boy said, his voice dropping low. "That's when she comes out. You'll hear her before you see her. A scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across concrete. Tek, tek, tek. And when you turn, she'll already be there, crawling fast, too fast, dragging her broken body after you." The others leaned closer, their breath misting in the cold. They say she was a schoolgirl once, fell onto the tracks. A train cut her in half, but she didn't die. She kept moving. Now she hunts at night, searching for legs she can steal. The group laughed nervously, pretending they didn't believe. But each of them, deep down, knew the stories weren't told just for fun. Because every few years, someone, always someone walking near the tracks at night, vanished without a trace. And when the wind was just right, you could hear it in the silence. Tek, tek, tek. Long before the whispers spread across playgrounds and late-night sleepovers, there was a girl. Her name was whispered differently in every retelling, sometimes Sachiko, sometimes Misaki, but always she was described as beautiful, with long black hair and quiet eyes. She was walking home from school late one evening when it happened. The train platform was slick with rain, the sky already dark. She stood too close to the edge, distracted by something. Some say she was bullied and pushed, others insist she slipped. The truth was lost in the chaos of that night. What is remembered, though, is the scream, the sound of steel against steel as the train roared into the station, the sudden slip of her body falling forward. And then the impossible, sickening sight, her torso separated from her legs in a spray of blood and bone. The crowd shrieked, but no one could move fast enough to stop it. Her body crumpled to the ground, twitching, and then, horribly, impossibly, it crawled. The girl's upper half clawed across the concrete, her nails tearing free in ribbons of flesh, dragging herself forward with a strength no human should have. Her mouth opened, and though no one could make sense of the words, they swore she tried to speak. She should have died instantly, but she didn't. From that night on, sightings began. In Nagoya, a businessman on his way home swore he saw a girl crawling across the overpass. She was fast, unnaturally fast, her elbows and hands slamming against the pavement with a wet rhythm. Teke, teke, teke. When he turned to run, she was already behind him, her pale hands clutching for his legs. In Fukuoka, a pair of high schoolers were dared to walk the tracks at night. They returned pale, shaking, unable to speak. Later, one confessed, a figure with long black hair had chased them. She had no lower body, just torn flesh and a trail of blood smeared across the gravel. And in Tokyo, a subway worker cleaning after hours vanished. All that was found was his hat lying beside the tracks and deep gouges in the concrete, as though something sharp had scraped across it again and again. The legend grew: if Teke Teke caught you, she would slice you in half, taking your legs so you would look like her. Some said she carried a scythe, others swore she used her hands, sharp and jagged from crawling endlessly. But all agreed on one thing: you would hear her before you saw her. That terrible rhythmic sound, tek, tek, tek. Daigo was 16, and he didn't believe in ghost stories, or at least he told himself he didn't. His friends joked about Kuchisake Onna, Hanako-san, and Teke Teke, but Daigo always rolled his eyes. They're just made up to scare kids, he'd say. Nothing's out there. But late one November night, walking home from cram school, he chose a shortcut. The air was sharp and the streets deserted. His path led him beneath an overpass where train tracks stretched endlessly in both directions. Daigo shoved his hands into his pockets and kept his head down. He wasn't thinking about legends, not really, until he heard it. A faint, scraping sound. He froze. It came again. Tek. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Tek. Daigo's heart began to pound. He told himself it was nothing, just rats, or loose gravel shifting, but the sound was getting closer, faster, louder. Tek, tek, tek. He spun around. At first, there was nothing. Just fog curling over the empty tracks, but then, emerging from the mist, he saw her. A girl. No, half a girl. Her long black hair matted with blood, her school uniform torn, her eyes wide and burning. Her torso dragged itself forward with inhuman speed, elbows cracking against the ground, nails scraping deep grooves into the concrete. Her lower body was gone, nothing but a shredded trail of blood. Daigo couldn't move. Her mouth opened. The sound that came out was less a voice than a wet gurgle, a word twisted into a shriek. "Where are my legs?" She launched at him. Daigo turned and ran, his shoes slamming against the pavement. His lungs burned instantly, but behind him the sound was deafening. Tek, 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 as she dragged herself faster than he could sprint. He didn't dare look back, but he could hear her nails scratching closer, her breaths wet and ragged, her voice rising in a screech that split the night. "Give them back! Give me your legs!" Daigo's mind raced. The stories. What had the kids said? There was no escape. If she touched you, she would tear you in half. He veered off the path, cutting through an alley, but the sound stayed with him, echoing off the walls. Teke, teke, teke. She was relentless, unstoppable. His foot caught on a stone. He stumbled, fell hard on his hands. Pain shot through his palms, but before he could rise, he saw it. A pale, blood-soaked hand slamming against the ground inches from his face. He scrambled up, heart screaming, and bolted. Her laughter followed him, high-pitched and broken. Daigo burst onto a main street, the neon lights of late-night bars glowing faintly ahead. Relief surged in his chest. If he could just reach the lights, someone would be there. Anyone. But when he turned the corner, she was waiting. Teke Teke blocked the street, her body twisted unnaturally, her hair dangling like a curtain. Blood smeared across the concrete beneath her. She raised herself on her hands, her mouth stretched into a jagged grin. Daigo screamed, stumbling backward. The last thing he heard before darkness swallowed him was the rhythm. Tek, tek, tek. The next morning, police found Daigo's school bag near the tracks. There was no body, but carved deep into the concrete, stretching for meters, were grooves too long and too sharp to have been made by anything human. And in the silence of that place, if you stood very still, you could swear you heard it. Tek, tek, tek. Epilogue. The legend lives. To this day, across Japan, the story of Teke Teke is told in whispers. Children are warned never to linger near train stations at night. Commuters avoid looking down dark tunnels after the last train has passed, because sometimes when the fog rolls in and the night grows too quiet, you hear it. That scraping, that relentless rhythm. And when you turn, she's already there, crawling fast, her hair wild, her eyes hungry, asking in a voice that is no longer human, "Where are my legs?" On a pitch-dark night in a quiet village near the old castle, the wind whispered through the bamboo groves, sending chills that seemed to crawl along the spine. The streets were empty, cobblestones glistening faintly under the weak glow of lanterns, and a heavy silence hung in the air. Somewhere in the distance, water trickled from a well, an unremarkable sound, yet somehow it carried with it the weight of dread. The story began with Okiku, a servant girl of extraordinary beauty and grace. She moved silently through the halls of a wealthy samurai's estate, her every gesture meticulous, her loyalty unwavering. Yet her presence drew envy and desire in equal measure, and that balance would tilt into tragedy. A set of 10 heirloom plates lay in the samurai's possession. Each plate, painted with delicate scenes of cranes gliding above cherry blossoms, held immense value, both material and symbolic. They were treasured, admired, and coveted. But the samurai saw more than mere beauty in these plates. He saw an opportunity to manipulate, to punish, and to bend Okiku to his will. Okiku served faithfully, tending to the household chores, cleaning the tatami mats until they gleamed, arranging the tea utensils with painstaking care. Yet she was vigilant, aware of the samurai's gaze lingering too long, his comments veiled with both praise and threat. When he demanded that she yield to him, she refused. That refusal, though silent and dignified, ignited a chain of events that would end in horror. One day, the samurai, frustrated and cunning, accused Okiku of losing one of the 10 precious plates. "Where is it, girl?" he demanded, his voice sharp, cutting through the quiet of the hall. "One plate is missing, and it is your duty to account for it." Okiku shook her head, fear mingling with outrage. She had seen no missing plate. She had handled each one with care, counting them meticulously before placing them back in their cabinet. "I swear it is not missing," she said softly, but the samurai's eyes narrowed. "You lie," he hissed. "You are clever with your words, but cleverness cannot hide your failure. Or perhaps you are hiding it for yourself." Her stomach twisted with anxiety, but she remained silent, knowing that any answer could lead to punishment far worse than mere reprimand. The samurai's mind, however, was already spinning a cruel plan. That night, he led Okiku to the stone well behind the estate. The moonlight shimmered on the water's surface, making it appear unnaturally still, almost hypnotic. The samurai's words cut through the air, dripping with menace. "Admit where the plate is," or Okiku, loyal and unyielding, could not confess to a crime she had not committed. And so the samurai's patience snapped. With a swift motion, he pushed her into the well. She fell with a sickening splash, her scream echoing off the walls, mingling with the sound of trickling water. When the villagers found the well the next morning, her body was gone, but her presence lingered. A soft sob, almost imperceptible, rose from the depths, a girl counting endlessly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Her voice, mournful and persistent, carried through the village night after night. Those who dared approach the well spoke of a cold wind that rose suddenly, extinguishing lanterns, of shadows twisting unnaturally, and of the faint, sorrowful cries of a girl trapped between worlds. People avoided the well. Children were warned never to play near it. Travelers hurried past after dark, ears straining for that haunting count, and those who lingered often reported seeing a pale hand reach out from the water, or a face glimpsed just beneath the surface, long black hair floating like tendrils in the darkness, eyes wide with terror and accusation. In the estate itself, the samurai tried to continue his life as if nothing had happened, but no matter where he went, he heard it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Always 9, never 10. That missing plate, gone as though it had vanished with her, left a void in the count and a void in his sanity. He could see her in every shadow, hear her in every dripping faucet, every whisper of wind through the cracks of sliding doors. The estate, once a place of order and discipline, became a cage haunted by the relentless cries of a girl he had condemned. Years passed, but the tale of Okiku did not fade. Travelers told it along the roads, and villagers whispered it by firesides. Some spoke of hearing her voice counting plates in the dead of night, long after the castle had fallen into disrepair. Others claimed to see her rising from the well, floating above it, hair wet and clinging to a body that no longer had weight or warmth, eyes fixed upon anyone who dared approach. One night, a young boy, curious and defiant, decided to see for himself. He crept to the well, lantern in hand, heart hammering. The wind moaned, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. He called out softly, "Okiku." The response was immediate. The counting began low at first, almost hesitant. 1, 2, 3. The boy froze. The sound grew louder, each number sharp and precise. 4, 5, 6. His lantern flickered, and in the brief shadow it cast, he saw her, pale, hair clinging to her face, eyes empty, yet filled with an ancient sorrow. 7, 8, 9. Before he could react, the water in the well rippled unnaturally. Her hands reached up, skeletal yet unmistakably human, pulling herself higher. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, echoing the agony of centuries, and the boy stumbled backward, tripping over roots and stones. When he looked again, she was gone. Only the still, dark water remained, but the sound lingered, a soft echo that followed him all the way home. That night, he dreamt of her endlessly counting, each number pounding like a drum in his skull. The missing 10th plate, an impossible void that demanded justice. Scholars who later investigated the tale noted that the legend of Okiku served as more than a ghost story. It was a story of injustice, of cruelty, and of a spirit bound by betrayal. The well became a symbol of that inescapable wrong, a reminder that even beauty and innocence could not shield one from human malice. Over time, visitors to the area spoke of strange phenomena near the well. Lanterns would extinguish, shadows would stretch unnaturally, and cold hands seemed to brush against the skin. Some claimed to see Okiku counting from afar, always 9, her mouth forming a silent plea for the missing 10th plate. For those who dared linger, the village's stories became a warning to disrespect the past, to ignore injustice, to approach the cursed well. These were acts that drew the attention of Okiku, and when her eyes fell upon you, there was no escape. Even today, her voice is said to rise from the well on quiet nights. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And if you dare answer, her hollow eyes will lock onto yours, her form half submerged yet fully present, reminding you that some wrongs are never forgotten and some spirits never rest. The villagers never stopped warning travelers. They knew the well's curse was real. The tale of Okiku, the girl counting the plates, endured, an eternal echo of sorrow and vengeance. On a dark, storm-laden night when the clouds swallowed the moon and the wind cut through the trees like a blade, whispers began to spread among the children of a quiet Japanese town. They spoke in trembling voices of a poem, a verse so cursed that simply reading it aloud could summon misery and death. This poem was known as Tomino's Hell. The story begins with a boy named Tomino, a child of ordinary appearance but extraordinary fate. He lived in a remote village, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where the mountains loomed large and rivers sang as they wound through the valleys. Tomino was quiet, thoughtful, often lost in books or wandering the edges of the forest that bordered the village. He was well liked, though his reserved nature gave him an air of mystery. No one knew how the poem first came to be, only that it had survived through centuries, whispered from child to child, and passed down in trembling handwriting in notebooks never meant to be seen by adults. The poem told the tale of Tomino's journey to hell, a journey lined with sorrow, betrayal, and unrelenting torment. But the curse lay not in the story itself. It lay in the act of reading it aloud. It was said that Tomino was a child marked from birth. The villagers whispered of strange happenings during his infancy, toys moving on their own, shadows that lingered too long, and a small figure glimpsed at the edge of the forest, watching, always watching. When Tomino grew older, his life seemed ordinary on the surface, but the poem predicted his fate. The verses described in precise, haunting detail the death of his mother, the suffering of his friends, and his inevitable journey into the underworld. It spoke of betrayal, of friends who would fail him, and of creatures lurking in the spaces between worlds, waiting to drag him into darkness. Those who read the poem aloud claimed to hear Tomino's voice echoing in the wind, even after the words were spoken. Some swore the poem would rearrange itself on the page, letters shifting, forming new lines that were never written before. Every reading was unique, but every reading carried the same curse. Aya, a high school girl curious about the legend, found the poem in an old library book. The book had been misplaced, dusty and worn, tucked behind texts on Japanese folklore. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the poem itself was unmistakable. Her friends dared her to read it aloud during lunch break in the empty classroom. At first, she hesitated. The poem's words were strange, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she read. Tomino's mother has passed away. He walks the path to hell alone. He hears the voices of those betrayed. The shadows follow him to the unknown. As Aya read, the temperature in the room dropped. Her breath formed clouds in front of her face. The lights flickered. A faint scratching came from the walls, like fingernails clawing against wood. Her friends laughed nervously, but Aya's hands trembled. By the final line, a low whisper seemed to circle the classroom. "Do not forget me, Tomino." The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. When she looked around, her friends were frozen, eyes wide, staring at something she could not see. And then, just for a moment, she saw a shadow at the window, a small boy with hollow eyes, pale skin, and an expression both sad and terrifying. After that day, strange occurrences followed Aya. At home, she would hear Tomino's voice calling from the darkness, soft, distant, yet unmistakably there. Objects moved of their own accord, lights flickered when she passed a room. Mirrors reflected a pale boy standing behind her, vanishing when she turned. Her friends began to fall ill, one by one after reading the poem. Fevers, nightmares, and sudden accidents plagued them. Even those who had not read it felt the unease creeping into their lives. Villagers whispered that once a line of the poem was read aloud, the curse was shared, spreading like a shadow over all who dared to know it. The poem's words seemed to pulse in Aya's mind, repeating themselves even when she tried to think of other things. Sleep brought visions. Tomino walking through a burning forest, rivers of black water, hands reaching from the shadows to grab him. Each night, the horrors grew, the whispers louder, the shadows closer. The poem spoke of Tomino's journey through hell, and as Aya read more, she realized the details were not merely stories. They were visions of the boy himself. Tomino wandered through landscapes that defied reality. Forests where the trees had teeth, rivers that whispered secrets of betrayal, and skies that bled red. He encountered spirits who sought to drag him into oblivion, yet he moved forward, driven by a will unknown. Aya saw it as a warning and a guide. If the poem were truly a curse, understanding its story might be the only way to survive. She memorized the lines, learning the places Tomino walked, the creatures he met, the horrors he endured. Each night she dreamt of following him, navigating the twisted landscape, always careful not to draw the attention of the shadows that sought to devour him. One evening, walking home along a deserted path, Aya felt a familiar chill. The wind carried the faintest murmur of a child's voice, sorrowful and pleading. "Do not forget me." From the corner of her eye, she glimpsed him. Tomino, pale and silent, standing beneath a broken street lamp. His hollow eyes bore into hers. She froze, but he did not move toward her. Instead, the shadows around him shifted, revealing figures writhing, screaming silently, reaching for him, for her. Aya's pulse raced. She remembered the poem's warning: never read aloud beyond what you can bear, never acknowledge the shadows. The ground beneath her seemed to pulse, dark liquid oozing like tar, threatening to pull her into the same hell Tomino walked. She ran. The boy followed silently, never breaking stride, never speaking. Behind him, the shadows multiplied, creeping along walls, floors, and trees. Each step brought the chilling sound of whispers, a cacophony of voices pleading, screaming, crying. The more Aya understood, the more trapped she felt. Knowledge of the poem became a burden, a tether to Tomino's fate. Dreams became indistinguishable from reality. Shadows in the corners of rooms seemed to move independently, watching, waiting. Friends who ignored the warnings fell ill or vanished. Teachers spoke of strange murmurs in classrooms after hours, objects moving on their own, and the faint sound of a child walking through the hallways, soft footsteps, dragging, uneven. Aya realized the poem was not simply cursed words. It was a bridge, a map, a warning, and a trap, all at once. Every reading strengthened its pull, drew her closer to Tomino's path through hell, closer to the shadows that would claim her if she faltered. One night, driven by desperation, Aya followed the poem's guidance, venturing into the forest where reality itself seemed thin, where the trees whispered secrets of the dead. The wind howled like wailing spirits, leaves snapping underfoot. Shadows twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that should not exist, half-formed bodies, eyes in places they should not be, mouths whispering the cursed lines. Then she saw him, Tomino, standing on a hill, surrounded by the horrors described in the poem. Hollow eyes, pale skin, the boy simultaneously lost and eternal. He spoke, not in words, but in feeling, a pull in her mind, a voice that wrapped around her thoughts. Do not read, do not follow, but you are already here. The shadows surged. Aya realized she had to face them, to survive by courage, by understanding, by walking the path that Tomino had endured for centuries. The forest became a labyrinth, the shadows relentless. Aya's heart pounded. Every breath was a struggle. She counted each step, each heartbeat, drawing strength from the poem's rhythm. 1, 2, 3. 4, and then she ran, never breaking stride, following the guidance of Tomino's journey through torment until the first light of dawn broke through the darkness. Aya survived the night, but the poem never left her. Its words haunted her dreams, its rhythm echoed in every quiet moment. She knew that anyone who read it would feel the same pull, the same dread, the same inevitability of following Tomino's path. Across villages and towns, the poem persisted, whispered in notebooks passed down through trembling hands. Those who read it alone heard the whispers, felt the shadows, saw the hollow eyes of the boy doomed to walk forever. The curse was never ending. And for Aya, as for all who knew the poem, the faint sound of dragging footsteps in the darkness served as a reminder that some words carry power, some knowledge is a burden, and some fates are unavoidable. At night, when the wind moans through the trees and the clouds swallow the moon, you might hear it. Tomino walks, Tomino waits, do not read, do not speak. And somewhere in the shadows a boy moves, pale and silent, guiding you, or perhaps leading you, into the horrors of his eternal hell. The forest lay in silence, a heavy, oppressive silence that pressed against the chest and whispered of secrets better left undiscovered. Aokigahara, at the base of Mount Fuji, was a place where shadows lingered long after sunset, where the wind moved through the trees like fingers brushing against skin, and where the earth seemed to breathe with an unsettling life of its own. Travelers called it the suicide forest, but locals knew it for something far darker. Hikaru, a young man burdened with grief, stood at the edge of the forest. The stories had drawn him, as they had drawn countless others. Tales of wandering souls, of hikers who vanished without a trace, of travelers who heard voices when no one was there. He had come seeking answers, closure, or perhaps a confrontation with the unknown. The path before him was narrow, flanked by ancient trees whose roots twisted like veins across the soil. As he stepped into the forest, the sunlight dimmed beneath the dense canopy. The air grew cooler, damp with moss and decay. Every sound seemed amplified, the crunch of leaves beneath his boots, the rustle of unseen creatures, the distant drip of water from hidden springs. Hikaru felt a strange pressure, as though the forest itself were observing, judging his intrusion. The deeper he walked, the more the path dissolved into a labyrinth of trees and shadows. He had brought a small backpack, water, a flashlight, and a notebook. Friends had warned him not to go, but he dismissed their fears as superstition. Yet, with each step, doubt crept in. The forest did not feel natural. It felt old, alive, aware. And it was not friendly. Hikaru began to hear faint sounds, first a whisper, then another. Words he could not understand, voices calling his name, soft and coaxing, like a lullaby sung beneath the roots of the trees. He paused, shining his flashlight into the darkness. There was no one there. The voices continued, growing louder, more insistent. They came from all directions, yet from nowhere at all. As night fell, the forest transformed. Shadows lengthened into grotesque shapes, roots curling like serpents, branches clawing at the sky. The air thickened, carrying the scent of iron and earth, of decay and rot. Hikaru's pulse quickened. The stories were true. Aokigahara was haunted. not by ghosts in the ordinary sense, but by something far older, something that fed on despair and fear. He stumbled upon remnants of the past, abandoned backpacks, torn clothing, rusted bicycles, and rope tied in knots that spoke of tragic ends. Each artifact told a story, a frozen moment of someone's final choice, yet it also carried a malevolent presence. Hikaru felt their eyes upon him, the collective gaze of hundreds of lost souls. He wanted to turn back, but the forest had a way of shifting, paths folding over themselves, guiding travelers deeper, trapping them in the maze. Hikaru set up a small camp in a clearing, hoping to wait out the night. But sleep was elusive. The whispers grew louder, now forming words he could understand. Promises of release, of solace, of answers. "Join us," they murmured. "There is no pain here, only freedom." The forest seemed to pulse around him. The ground throbbed faintly beneath his feet. The trees swayed though there was no wind, and shadows moved independently, forming shapes that mimicked his every action. Hikaru felt his sanity fraying. He tried to focus, repeating his purpose, to explore, to understand, to witness, but the forest did not allow clarity. It consumed thought, eroded willpower, feeding on the emotions of those who entered. The first encounter came silently. A figure appeared at the edge of his firelight, a man, pale and hollow-eyed, staring without blinking. Hikaru froze. The man did not speak, but raised a hand, pointing into the darkness. Hikaru followed the gesture and saw a path that had not existed moments before. The trees arched unnaturally, forming a corridor leading deeper into the forest. Compelled by fear and curiosity, Hikaru stepped forward. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, the sounds of footsteps echoing behind him, though no one followed. Shadows formed grotesque faces, mouths opening in silent screams. The whispers returned, now urgent, desperate, pleading. Hikaru's mind teetered on the edge, yet he pressed onward. Hours passed, though time felt meaningless. He came upon a small shrine half buried in moss, candles long extinguished. Paper talismans fluttered in the non-existent wind, inscribed with prayers and warnings. The air here was colder, heavier. Hikaru sensed a presence, not human, not entirely spirit, something older, hungrier. Suddenly a scream pierced the forest, a human scream, raw with terror. Hikaru spun toward the sound. The trees had parted, revealing a figure crouched beside a well-hidden crevice. The figure was emaciated, hair long and tangled, eyes wide and unblinking. It stared at him, mouth opening in a silent wail. Hikaru wanted to run, but his legs refused. The forest seemed to root him in place, forcing him to watch. The figure moved with unnatural speed, vanishing into the shadows and reappearing moments later. Hikaru realized the forest did not obey normal rules. Paths twisted, distances warped, and the very air seemed to resist escape. Every step he took only led him deeper. The whispers now spoke in his mind directly, bypassing his ears. "You cannot leave. You belong to the forest. All who enter are ours." Hikaru's flashlight flickered, and in the brief darkness he saw them. Dozens of figures, pale and hollow, frozen in mid-motion, their eyes empty, yet filled with longing. They moved silently, surrounding him, yet when he turned fully, they were gone. Only the whispers remained, pressing into his skull. Days, or perhaps hours, passed. Hikaru lost all sense of time. Hunger and thirst gnawed at him, yet the forest provided nothing. His journal, once filled with observations, now contained only sketches of twisted trees, shadowy figures, and the haunting faces of those who had come before. At the heart of the forest he found the well, ancient and overgrown. The water inside was black, reflecting not the sky, but a void. The whispers coalesced around it, a chorus of voices. Look, see, join us. Forever, Hikaru peered into the water. His reflection wavered, then shifted. The face staring back was not entirely his own, pale, hollow-eyed, twisted in a silent scream. The water rippled, and from its depths, hands reached up, skeletal and desperate. He stumbled back, heart racing. The forest seemed to pulse with life, branches snapping like bones. The figures from before emerged from the shadows, moving toward him, eyes empty yet accusatory. Hikaru realized the truth. Aokigahara was not merely a forest. It was a prison, a living entity feeding on despair, using lost souls to ensnare the living. Hikaru ran, branches clawing at his skin, roots tangling his feet. The whispers followed, echoing in his mind. You cannot leave. You belong to us. You are ours. He tripped, falling hard, scraping his hands and knees on the cold earth. The figures closed in, surrounding him, their silent wails pressing on his consciousness. In a final act of desperation, Hikaru screamed into the forest, a sound of raw terror and defiance. The shadows recoiled for a moment, then surged forward again. The well loomed ahead, black and endless, and he understood that escape was impossible. The forest had claimed him, just as it had claimed countless others. To this day, travelers who enter Aokigahara alone speak of strange phenomena. Shadows that move against the wind, whispers of names never spoken, footprints that vanish, and glimpses of pale figures watching from between the trees. Those who survive emerge changed, silent, haunted, carrying with them the memory of a forest that never lets go. Some say Hikaru's voice can still be heard on quiet nights, calling into the void, a warning to the living, a lament for the lost, a testament to the enduring hunger of Aokigahara. The forest waits, patient and eternal, ready to claim anyone who dares step beneath its canopy. Its trees are sentinels, its shadows hunters, and its whispers are promises of something far worse than death, eternal entrapment in a living nightmare. And if you enter, beware. The forest remembers. The forest waits. The forest wants. Do not stray. Do not linger. Do not listen, or you may never return. In the quiet suburbs of Tokyo, there exists a place shrouded in whispered terror, a legend that has haunted school bathrooms for decades. It is said that if you enter a certain bathroom stall, close the door, and hear the faint rustle of a cloak, you have summoned him. He is known as Akamanto, the Red Cape Ghost, a spirit both elegant and deadly, whose presence turns a mundane bathroom into a chamber of fear. Keiko, a high school girl with a curiosity that often bordered on recklessness, had heard the stories countless times. Her friends spoke of the red-cloaked figure with trembling voices, cautioning against speaking aloud, against drawing attention. He asks a question, one whispered, and the wrong answer could cost you your life. The legend goes that Akamanto waits in the last stall of public bathrooms, particularly those of girls' schools. His cape is blood red, flowing like liquid, masking the horror beneath. His face is hidden by a porcelain mask, flawless and expressionless, but rumors say his eyes are pits of darkness capable of reading the soul. One afternoon, curiosity overcame fear. Keiko had to use the bathroom during lunch break, and the last stall, locked and silent, called to her like a dare. She hesitated, recalling every warning. Never speak unless spoken to, never choose without thought. But she slipped inside, closing the door behind her. The stall felt smaller than it had ever seemed. Shadows pressed against the walls and a cold draft wound through the tiles. Then a sound, the faintest rustle like silk brushing against tile. Keiko's heart jumped. She looked up, and there he was, Akamanto, his red cape hanging from his shoulders, face obscured. The mask glinted in the fluorescent light. Silence filled the stall, but it was not peaceful. It was heavy, expectant. "Do you want the red paper or the blue paper?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost melodic, yet hollow, vibrating through the stall like an unseen wind. Keiko's mind froze. The stories had warned her about this choice. She remembered the whispers, "Answer wrong, and death comes swiftly." But which was the right answer? The red paper, symbolizing blood? The blue paper, symbolizing suffocation, drowning, or some unspeakable torment? Her instincts screamed. She could feel the temperature drop as Akamanto's presence pressed closer. She swallowed, forcing her voice out, trembling. "Red!" The stall went silent. Then a whisper. "Very well." At first, nothing happened. The tiles remained cold, the air heavy, but then the red of his cape began to ripple unnaturally, like liquid spreading across the floor. The mask tilted toward her, and she realized with horror that the reflection in the glossy tiles behind him was wrong. It wasn't just a reflection, it was a version of her, twisted, screaming silently, reaching out. Keiko stumbled back, heart hammering. The cape surged forward like a tidal wave, enveloping her. She felt herself lifted, suspended between reality and some other plane. The air smelled of iron and decay. Whispers surrounded her, voices of those who had come before, trapped forever in his stall, forever answering the wrong question. The legend of Akamanto is older than any one school or bathroom. Some say he was a man wronged, executed unjustly, his spirit twisted by rage and despair. Others claim he was a figure of folklore, born from the fears of children who used school toilets alone at night. No one knows for certain, but the pattern remains. Anyone alone in a bathroom stall, choosing red or blue, risks drawing his attention. Stories tell of those who tried to resist. Some ran, screaming, only to find the stall doors locked from the inside, the air filled with invisible hands that clawed at their bodies, pulling them into walls. Others tried to speak a different color, hoping for a loophole, only to see the mask lift, revealing a face both beautiful and horrifying, with eyes that devoured the soul. Akamanto's methods are deliberate. Red paper meant bleeding from every orifice, the body torn apart slowly, the sound of one's own heartbeat echoing like a drum. Blue paper meant being dragged beneath the tiles, suffocating, trapped in a watery abyss beneath the bathroom floor, forever struggling, never surfacing. No choice leads to salvation. only variations of torment. Keiko's struggles seemed endless. The red cape pressed closer, wrapping her in warmth that burned, constricted, and consumed. Whispers echoed around her, carrying the names of girls and boys who had vanished. Whispers full of despair, of terror, of warning. Every instinct in her screamed to fight, but her body moved as if underwater, weighted by some force older than the building, older than the city. Suddenly she remembered the tales of those who survived. Some claimed that not choosing at all, saying nothing, or stepping out of the stall in the precise moment before he noticed could break the curse. But hesitation could be just as deadly. Akamanto does not tolerate indecision, the slightest falter, and the stall becomes a tomb. Keiko's mind raced. The cape began to flow like blood, covering the tiles, reaching toward her ankles. She held her breath, closed her eyes, and stepped to the side, gripping the edge of the stall door. Time slowed. The whispers intensified, voices overlapping, pressing into her skull. Choose, choose, choose. Then, with a force like ice, she slipped past the cape, throwing the stall door open. She stumbled into the hallway. The fluorescent lights flickered. Silence returned, broken only by her ragged breathing. Behind her, the stall was empty. No mask, no red cape, no whispers. Yet she could feel it, its gaze, still following her, patient, waiting. From that day, Keiko avoided the bathrooms at school, though she knew the story would never leave her. At night, in her dreams, the red cape appears. Sometimes it stands in the corner, watching. Sometimes it glides silently through corridors, always asking, always waiting. And the voices of those who failed, echo relentlessly. Red or blue, red or blue. The legend of Akamanto persists. Students whisper in fear, daring each other to test the stalls. New generations discover the old bathrooms, read the stories online, pass them along with the thrill of danger. And though some survive, all are marked. The memory of the mask, the red cape, the choice, stays forever. In quiet moments, when the hallways are empty and the wind drifts through the cracks, you might hear the faint rustle of silk. If you are alone and you see the shadow of red, listen carefully. Do not speak. Do not choose. And whatever you do, do not look behind the stall door, because Akamanto waits, always, patiently, elegantly, deadly, and once he notices you, there is no escape. The village of rural Japan lay under a heavy summer haze, the kind that made the cicadas' cries seem almost deafening. Among the rice paddies and narrow lanes, the elders whispered of a figure that stalked children, a spirit so tall and unrelenting that no building could hide them. They called her Hachishaku-sama, the 8-foot woman. Miyu, a 12-year-old girl with a curious mind and a habit of wandering, had heard the stories from her older cousins. If you see a woman in white, tall as the ceiling, they warned, run. She will come for you, she will take you, and you will never return. It seemed impossible. 8 feet tall, a woman who could tower over rooftops? Miyu had laughed at the tale. Yet that summer, as the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened across the fields, she began to understand that laughter was dangerous. It started subtly. The wind carried whispers that no one else seemed to hear. Her friends claimed the noise was nothing, a trick of the evening breeze, but Miyu felt eyes on her wherever she walked. One afternoon, near the abandoned shrine at the edge of the village, she saw it, a figure in white, impossibly tall, standing behind the trees. Miyu froze. The figure did not move, did not blink. Its face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, shadowed and impenetrable. Yet even through the obscurity, she felt the weight of its gaze. She ran, sprinting home, but the feeling did not leave. In dreams, the woman appeared at the end of hallways, in reflections, in the corners of her vision. The legend, her grandmother explained later, was simple yet horrifying. Hachishaku-sama comes for children, usually those who wander alone or are too curious. Her voice is said to mimic loved ones, calling children into danger. Once she marks someone she follows relentlessly, appearing at windows, behind doors, or suddenly along the roadside. No distance is too great, no obstacle too high. One evening, Miyu stayed late, helping her mother with chores. She carried a basket across the rice fields when she heard it, a soft, lilting voice calling her name. At first, it sounded like her mother, warm and familiar, but the tone was wrong, stretched, echoing unnaturally across the paddies. She spun around. There she was, Hachishaku-sama, white dress flowing, hat tilted, her legs stretched impossibly long, feet barely touching the ground. She moved with a smooth, gliding motion, yet each step seemed to cover twice the distance of Miyu's sprinting. Panic surged through her veins. She ran toward home, her breath ragged, heart hammering like a drum. The voice followed her, calling, coaxing, luring. "Miyu, come with me. It's so lonely." Miyu did not look back. She reached the safety of her house, slammed the door, and tried to breathe. But at night, the shadow of the 8-foot woman crept against her walls. Her dreams were filled with endless corridors, forests that twisted impossibly, and the figure always at the end, silent, staring, waiting. Hachishaku-sama's terror was not in sudden attacks but in relentless pursuit. Children who saw her often described days of unease, glimpses of white at the edge of vision, the sound of soft footsteps behind them, whispers that imitated their friends or siblings. Some would find small objects missing from their rooms, left behind as taunts, proof that the 8-foot woman had been there. Miyu began to notice patterns. She would see her only in open spaces, fields, schoolyards, long corridors. Buildings, trees, or crowds offered little protection. Once seen, she followed. Distance and barricades mattered little. Her movements were unnervingly fluid, as though the laws of nature bent around her. Desperate, Miyu researched old records in the village. She discovered stories spanning decades, children disappearing near rice fields, playgrounds, and shrines. Witnesses described a woman impossibly tall, dressed in white, often carrying a parasol. Attempts to run or hide failed. Some children vanished completely, others returned hours later, silent and pale, their memories fragmented. The message was always clear: curiosity could be deadly. One hot August afternoon, Miyu ventured into the village library. She found an old journal written by a teacher decades ago, recounting her own encounter with Hachishaku-sama. The teacher had been walking home, saw the figure near the schoolyard, and had fled to the safety of the classroom. Yet, even in the sanctuary of 4 walls, she heard the gliding steps, soft and unyielding, approaching her desk. Panic had gripped her. She left the building, only to find the figure waiting across the street. The journal concluded with chilling words: "Do not run, do not hide. She will find you regardless. The only hope is to make her see you as not worth taking." Miyu clutched the journal, heart racing. She now understood. Hachishaku-sama's power was psychological, feeding on fear, doubt, and attention. To avoid her, one had to remain calm, unremarkable, invisible in the eyes of the relentless spirit. That evening, as dusk fell over the rice fields, Miyu felt it, eyes on her. She looked up slowly. There she was, emerging from the shadows, taller than the tallest tree, white dress billowing. Her face remained hidden under the wide-brimmed hat. Miyu's instincts screamed to flee, but she forced herself to stay still, quiet, unassuming. The 8-foot woman stopped, tilting her head as if studying, assessing. The wind whispered through the paddies, carrying the faint sound of footsteps that shouldn't exist. Miyu held her breath, heart pounding, minutes stretched into eternity. Then she slowly lowered her gaze, and with a soundless glide, she moved past Miyu, leaving the child unharmed. The message was clear. Survival depended not on speed or strength, but on composure, invisibility in the spirit's perception. Miyu learned to live cautiously. She avoided isolated fields, traveled in groups, and ignored voices that seemed too familiar. But even with vigilance, the 8-foot woman lingered in her mind. She appeared in dreams, at school, in reflections. Her presence was a warning, a reminder that curiosity, carelessness, or alone time could summon forces beyond human control. Stories of Hachishaku-sama persist in Japan. Parents warn children, teachers caution students, and whispers circulate among playgrounds and classrooms. She is a cautionary tale, but also a warning etched in fear. The 8-foot woman does not merely haunt, she follows, watches, and waits. Some say she is a manifestation of collective anxiety. Others believe she is the restless spirit of a woman wronged, cursed to wander, marking children to feed an insatiable need. No one knows her origin for certain. What matters is her persistence, her inevitability, the chilling certainty that if you see her, she will follow. For those who have glimpsed the white dress and the parasol, Hachishaku-sama is not a story, but a living terror. She is the long shadow in a summer field, the impossible figure at the corridor's end, the silent stalker that feeds on fear itself. And if you ever walk alone through fields or empty streets, beware. Look carefully at the shadows. Do not linger. Do not turn. For the 8-foot woman is watching. And if she decides you are worth taking, you will vanish, swallowed by the endless length of her haunting presence. The village remembers. The children whisper. The elders nod knowingly. Hachishaku-sama waits, elegant, towering, and eternal. Do not wander alone. Do not answer the voice. Do not meet her gaze. She never forgets. It was a rainy night on a quiet stretch of the Chuo main line, somewhere between the bustling stations of Tokyo. For commuters, it was an ordinary evening, trains clattering over rails, the scent of wet asphalt drifting in from the streets. But for Takumi, a young office worker returning from a late shift, this night would become unforgettable, a descent into a nightmare that blurred the line between reality and urban legend. Takumi had missed his usual train and boarded a late-night service that promised to drop him at his suburban station. The carriage was nearly empty, only a few sleepy passengers dotted along the fluorescent-lit benches. As the train rattled forward, rain streaked against the windows, and Takumi felt the comfortable lull of routine until the train screeched to a sudden halt in the darkness. He glanced out the window. Nothing. No station lights, no platform, just a curtain of rain and darkness stretching on both sides. A shiver ran down his spine. He checked the route map. Next stop, Kisaragi Station? He murmured aloud, frowning. The name was unfamiliar. He had never heard of it. As the train doors slid open, a gust of cold, damp air swept into the carriage. Takumi hesitated, glancing around. The platform seemed different. It was narrow, far too long, stretching into shadows that flickered in the dim, flickering lamps. There were no signs of staff, no vending machines, no other passengers. A strange silence hung as if the station existed outside of time itself. Curiosity mingled with unease. Takumi stepped onto the platform, the wet concrete slippery under his shoes. The doors shut behind him, sealing the carriage in darkness. He noticed a timetable on a rusted pole, the ink smudged and old. None of the trains made sense. No destinations he recognized, no times that matched any known schedule. Something in the air felt wrong. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was just an old, abandoned stop. But as he walked, Takumi noticed subtle signs, footprints in the rain that did not belong to him, a faint echo of voices that vanished the moment he strained to hear them, and shadows flitting at the edges of his vision. A soft, metallic ringing reached his ears, like the signal of a train far away. Yet it had no source. Takumi quickened his pace, moving toward the dim glow of a small waiting area. The benches were warped, the walls cracked, and the fluorescent lights flickered erratically. He was not alone. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw figures, brief, fleeting shapes, standing at the far end of the platform. They did not move naturally. Their limbs seemed twisted, gliding rather than walking. Faces were indistinct, blurred, as if he could see them but never truly recognize them. Panic rose, yet he was drawn toward them, compelled by an inexplicable force. He called out, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Hello! Is anyone here?" No answer, only the faint hum of the flickering lights. Then a whisper, so soft it could have been imagined. "Takumi." The whisper repeated, closer this time, echoing from the shadows behind the benches. He spun around, but no one was there. The shadows themselves seemed to move independently, stretching, twisting, always at the corner of his vision. His heart raced. Takumi considered running back to the train, but the carriage had disappeared, leaving only the endless stretch of platform and the oppressive night around him. A sudden realization struck him. This was no ordinary station. This was Kisaragi Station, a place of legend among urban explorers and netizens, a station that appeared only to those it chose, trapping them between reality and something else, a liminal space where no one could track time or direction. Takumi's mind spun with questions. How had he arrived here? How could a station exist without coordinates, without record? The rain fell harder, the sound pounding like a drum, masking the faint whispers that seemed to echo all around him. He moved cautiously, each step amplifying the eerie feeling that the platform was alive, observing him, reacting to him. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. The station never changed. The lights flickered, the shadows swayed, and the whispers grew bolder, forming words that were almost intelligible. Stay. Follow. Don't leave. Takumi came upon a staircase leading down into darkness. Hesitation rooted him to the spot. The air that rose from the stairwell was cold, damp, and carried a smell he could not place, metallic, like rust and wet earth, mingled with something far fouler. Yet he felt compelled to descend. He stepped down slowly, each creaking step echoing like a heartbeat. At the bottom, the corridor stretched impossibly long. Doors lined each side, numbered strangely, 13, 27, 42, numbers that should have no meaning. Takumi tried to open one, but it was locked. Behind it, he could hear faint sobs, whispers, footsteps, and the scraping of nails against concrete. A sudden movement at the far end of the corridor caught his attention. A figure emerged, tall, thin, indistinct in shape, but undeniably human in form. It glided toward him, silent, its face hidden beneath shadows. Takumi stumbled backward, heart hammering, but the corridor seemed endless. No matter how far he ran, the figure always closed the distance effortlessly. In the panic, Takumi remembered the tales online, accounts of others who had vanished, trapped in Kisaragi Station for days, weeks, or longer. Some returned, pale and muttering about endless stairwells and whispering figures. Others were never found. There were rumors of online forums where lost travelers posted cryptic messages from the station, messages that sometimes vanished before anyone else could read them. He tried to call for help, but his phone showed no signal, no bars, nothing but the cold glow of the screen. The figure approached, stopping just out of reach, its presence heavy, suffocating, almost sentient. Takumi could feel it probing his mind, sifting through his fear, feeding on his terror. He ran blindly, turning corner after corner, but the station twisted impossibly, like a nightmare built of steel and concrete. Stairs led to nowhere, doors opened into walls, platforms stretched into infinity. The whispers followed, growing louder. Stay. You cannot leave. This is your home now. Takumi stumbled into a small waiting area, the walls plastered with peeling advertisements from decades past. A faint figure appeared at the far end, a young woman, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. She beckoned to him, mouthing words he could not hear. He approached, desperate for any sign of sanity, but as he drew closer, she dissolved into shadow, leaving only the oppressive emptiness of the station. The red glow of lights above shifted unnaturally, casting long, impossible shadows. Takumi realized with horror that the station was not bound by the rules of the world. It was a place outside time, outside reality, feeding on the fear of those trapped within it. And he was now part of it. Hours, days, or perhaps mere moments later, he could no longer tell, the train returned. Doors slid open with a metallic screech, but this time the carriage was empty. Takumi hesitated, unsure if stepping in would lead home or deeper into the station's labyrinth. A final whisper close to his ear made his blood run cold. Next time, you may not return. The urban legend of Kisaragi Station continues to this day. Travelers who board late-night trains may glimpse it, a phantom stop that appears only for those chosen. No one knows its origin, no one can predict when it will manifest, and once inside, the station may never let you leave. The few who have returned are forever changed, haunted by corridors that shift in dreams, stairs that climb endlessly, and the whispering, omnipresent voice that calls your name in the dead of night. And in the darkest hours, if you find yourself alone on a platform that shouldn't exist, watch for the faint glimmer of lights, the distant echo of a train, and the whispers in the wind. Do not follow them, do not answer, because Kisaragi Station is patient, and once it notices you, it will not let you go. They called it a story too dangerous to be told, a tale whispered in fragments, half remembered, smothered beneath centuries of fear. The Japanese called it Gozu, the cowhead. No one knew where the legend began or whether it was fact or fiction, but one warning echoed through every retelling: never listen to the story in its entirety. The tale itself had been buried, locked away in whispers, passed between trembling lips of the old and the curious. Teachers dared to reference it in class, but never recited its lines. Parents warned their children never to speak of it. Even folklorists, those who made a life out of preserving stories, avoided it, as if simply writing it down could invite misfortune. But still, curiosity always wins. The story begins, as most horrors do, in the classroom. A group of students sat restless during a late summer afternoon. Their teacher, a man in his 40s with a fondness for ghost stories, had run out of material. The cicadas screamed from the trees outside, and sweat clung to the students' uniforms. "Do you want to hear something truly scary?" the teacher asked with a grin. The class perked up instantly. Horror stories were his specialty, tales of Yūrei, Onryo, and the spirits that lingered at shrines. But today, his eyes glimmered with something different, something darker. He pulled out a tattered notebook, its cover peeling, edges stained with age. "This is a story," he said, lowering his voice, "that no one is supposed to tell. They say it's cursed, that once you hear it, you can't escape it. Your mind begins to unravel, and sometimes people don't live to tell about it." The students laughed nervously. Some leaned closer. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "It's called Gozu, the cowhead." No one spoke. He flipped open the notebook. "Are you sure you want to hear it?" The class erupted in mixed cries, half urging him to continue, half begging him to stop. He smiled, pretending to hesitate. And then, without another word, he began to read. The words he spoke were strange, almost rhythmic. They slid across the room like shadows. At first, the students sat still, listening with wide eyes, but soon something in the air shifted. A heaviness fell over them, suffocating, as though invisible hands pressed against their chests. One girl whimpered, her face pale. Another boy's hands trembled uncontrollably. Sweat rolled down the teacher's forehead, though he seemed not to notice. His eyes glazed over, as if he were reciting words that weren't his own. And then came the sound. It was faint at first, an echo, a shuffle, a dragging noise, something heavy scraping across the wooden floorboards, though nothing moved. Then, tonk, 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 a slow, deliberate knocking from nowhere. The students looked around frantically, some clutching their desks, others pressing their hands over their ears. A girl collapsed, her body shaking violently. Another began to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence that followed each thud. The teacher's mouth moved faster now. The words weren't Japanese, they weren't any language the children knew. It was guttural, animalistic, wet and raw, like flesh tearing apart. Tonk, tonk, tonk. The sound grew louder, closer, and then the smell came. Thick, metallic, rotting, like the stench of a slaughterhouse left in the sun. Students gagged. A boy vomited across his desk. The teacher turned the page, sweat dripping into his collar. And that's when one student noticed something horrifying. His teeth. They weren't his teeth anymore. They looked larger, sharper, yellowing like those of a beast. The girl closest to him shrieked. He slammed the notebook shut. Instantly, the sound stopped. The smell faded. The students gasped for air as if they had just surfaced from drowning. But the silence that followed was not relief. It was worse, because in that silence, every single one of them heard it. A voice, low, inhuman, coming from just outside the classroom door. Tell the rest. No one left school that day the same. Some fainted and were carried home. Others refused to speak of what they'd heard. The teacher never returned to class. His name disappeared from the school registry as though he had never existed. But the whispers spread. They said the story of Gozu was about a village, a forgotten settlement deep in the mountains. The people there practiced strange rituals older than Shinto, older than Buddhism, older than any written word. They worshipped something neither man nor beast, something with the body of a man and the head of a cow. Offerings of blood and flesh were made to appease it. Those who resisted vanished overnight. Travelers who stumbled into the village were never seen again, and the deeper the tale went, the worse the stories became. Children butchered in fields, their screams carried on the wind. Farmers who harvested not rice, but bones. Women who gave birth to calves with human faces, crying in broken words before being buried alive. And always at the center of it all, the cow head. It was said that anyone who listened too long, who reached the end of the tale, would be claimed by it. Their soul devoured, their body left as an empty husk. One account spoke of a university group in the 1970s. Folklore students had uncovered a manuscript believed to contain the full Gozu legend. They met late at night to read it together. By morning, the janitor found them in the lecture hall, every one of them dead, their faces twisted in terror, their eyes burst, mouths frozen mid-scream. The manuscript was gone. Another account told of a bus ride through the countryside. A teacher entertained his students with ghost stories to pass the time. When he reached Gozu, the children begged him to continue. He did. The bus was later found on the side of the road. Every passenger was unconscious, some frothing at the mouth, others catatonic. The driver's hands still gripped the wheel, though his eyes were blank. Not a single one could recall what had happened. But here's the truth. No one speaks. The story doesn't just end because once you begin to hear it, something begins to follow. Late at night, when you're alone, you may hear it. The dragging footsteps, the dull, wet knocking, tonk, tonk, tonk. And if you're unlucky enough, you may catch the stench, that rancid mix of rotting meat and fresh blood. And then if you look into the darkness long enough, you'll see him, tall, human in form. But his head is that of a cow, bloated, sagging, flies buzzing around his eyes. His mouth hangs open, filled with teeth that don't belong in any animal or man, and he will lean close, so close you can feel the heat of his breath, and he will whisper, "Shall I tell you the rest?" The Gozu story never truly ends because no one survives to hear its full telling. Each version you encounter is only a fragment, cut short before the true conclusion. Perhaps that's why the tale still lingers, because somewhere the full story exists, hidden in a notebook, buried in a temple, carried in the memories of those too terrified to speak. And one day you might stumble upon it, and when you do, you'll understand why no one should ever listen to the story of Gozu, because the story doesn't just haunt you, it consumes you. The story of Oiwa begins not in the shadowed forests of Japan, nor in the haunted countryside, but in the heart of Edo itself, what we now call Tokyo. It is a story that has lived for centuries, woven into plays, whispered by candlelight, and feared by those who know the weight of curses. For Oiwa is not just a ghost, she is the embodiment of betrayal, sorrow, and vengeance, eternal. Long ago in the early 17th century, there lived a woman named Oiwa. By all accounts, she was a devoted wife, gentle, loving, and loyal to her husband, Yemon, a masterless samurai. Though they were poor, Oiwa stood by him through hardship, believing his honor would one day restore their fortunes. She cooked his meals, mended his clothes, and bore the endless weight of poverty with patience. But Yemon was not a man of virtue. Beneath his surface of honor beat a heart blackened with greed and ambition. He longed for wealth, for status, for a life far beyond the shabby walls of their home. And soon, temptation came in the form of another woman, Umi, the granddaughter of a wealthy merchant. She was young, beautiful, and her family's fortune glittered in Yemon's eyes like a lure he could not resist. Yet Oiwa stood in his way. Yemon's love had long since cooled. To him, Oiwa was no longer the woman he once cherished, but an obstacle to his rise. Divorce was not an option. It would bring dishonor and shame. And so he conspired with Ume's family to rid himself of his faithful wife. They devised a plan. Oiwa was given a gift, face cream, said to be a token of kindness. She, unsuspecting, applied it eagerly, believing perhaps it was a small luxury to make herself more beautiful for her husband. But the cream was poisoned. Slowly, insidiously, her body betrayed her. Her skin blistered and peeled. One eye sagged grotesquely, slipping down her cheek. Her face, once gentle and kind, warped into a mask of horror. Oiwa's beauty, the pride she had once held in modesty, was stolen from her. When she discovered the truth, when she realized her husband had betrayed her with poison meant to erase her existence, her heart shattered. She staggered through their home, her hair disheveled, her face half melted, whispering Emon's name with a mixture of sorrow and rage. And then, in her despair, she seized his sword. But fate was cruel. Her weakened body faltered, and she fell upon the blade. Blood pooled beneath her as her life ebbed away. Yet in her final moments, Oiwa's sorrow twisted into fury. She cursed her husband, cursed Uma, cursed every hand that had betrayed her. "I will never forgive you," she whispered, as her soul slipped free. "I will never rest." From that moment, Oiwa was no longer just a woman. She became Onryo, a vengeful spirit, bound not to heaven nor earth, but to the weight of her rage. Eamon thought her gone. He thought himself free. He married Uma and entered her family's wealth. But his new life was anything but peaceful. On their wedding night, when he unveiled his bride, he gasped in horror. It was not Um's face that looked back at him. It was Oiwa's. Her ruined eye bulged, her skin sagged, her mouth twisted in a grotesque grin. He screamed, slashing his sword wildly. Blood sprayed across the tatami mats. When he looked down, it was Ume's lifeless body lying at his feet, and Oiwa's laughter echoed in the dark. From then on, Yemen's life unraveled into madness. He could not escape Oiwa's face. In every shadow, in every lantern's glow, in every pool of water, her reflection awaited him. At night, she whispered his name, drawing closer until he woke, drenched in sweat. By day, he saw her among crowds, lurking just beyond reach. His sword struck down friend and foe alike, for each time he looked upon them, Oiwa's visage stared back. His allies abandoned him, his enemies closed in. Still he ran, desperate to escape the curse, but there is no escape from Oiwa. One night, as he fled through the darkened streets, lantern light flickered against the paper walls. He turned, and there she was, her hair long and matted, her kimono soaked in blood, her face a nightmare of melted flesh. "Emon," she moaned. He stumbled backward, swinging his blade in terror, but the floorboards beneath him gave way, plunging him into the black waters of the river below. His body was never recovered. Oiwa's curse had claimed him, yet her vengeance did not end with Aiemon. For generations, her story lived on in kabuki theater, most famously in the play Yotsuya Kaidan. Actors who portrayed her, crew who staged the play, all feared her wrath. Strange accidents plagued productions, sets collapsing, props breaking, sudden deaths among performers. To this day, before any retelling of Oiwa's tale, actors and filmmakers travel to her grave at Myogyo-ji Temple in Tokyo. They offer prayers, flowers, and ask for her forgiveness before daring to summon her name on stage or screen. Even modern film crews equipped with lights and cameras kneel before her resting place, terrified that to ignore her spirit is to invite disaster. The curse of Oiwa endures not because it is written, but because it is lived. Her story bleeds into reality. Her tragedy is eternal, and her vengeance is patient. Sometimes, it is said, if you whisper her name too often, if you recount her tale without respect, you may hear her. The dragging of silk across tatami mats, the creak of a door opening on its own, a distorted face staring back at you from the mirror, her ruined eye watching, waiting. And if she comes for you, remember, it is not death she brings swiftly. It is fear. Endless, suffocating fear. For Oiwa is not a ghost that fades with dawn. She is betrayal given form. She is sorrow turned eternal. She is the curse that never dies.